All right, let's get straight into this. When we examine contemplative traditions, it is incredibly easy to just get completely bogged down in the cultural dogma, the philosophy, the religion. But for this explainer, we are stripping all of that away, completely. We're going to look at Ananda Marga not as a belief system, but strictly as a sophisticated psychophysical technology. We're literally going to decompile it. Think of this as a deep dive into an energetic framework that takes classical indological structures and just fuses them with highly targeted neurobiological manipulation. So if you're a clinician, a neuroscientist, or a scholar of contemplative mechanics, you're in the right place, because that is exactly the level we are operating on today. Here is our architectural syllabus for this explainer. We'll trace the contemplative genealogy and origins, map the biopsychology of the chakras, break down the Sahaja yoga system, explore pranayama and autonomic regulation, and finally, dive into some advanced tantric contemplation methods. Starting with Section 1, Contemplative Genealogy and Origins, or what I like to call the source code. Let's look at the epistemological origins here. The contemplative practices of Ananda Marga were synthesized back in 1955 by Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. And what he essentially did was create this incredibly modern, structured system that takes the eight-limbed framework of Patanjali and essentially supercharges it with the non-dual somatic mechanics of medieval Shaiva Tantra. He classified this new synthesis as Rajadhiraja Yoga. Now, this perfectly illustrates the mechanical difference between classical yoga and Sarkar's system. Classical Patanjalian Raja Yoga is heavily sequential, right? You master your moral restraints first, and then eventually you move on to deep absorption. But Rajadhiraja Yoga, it operates on a parallel integrated model. In this system, ethical development, your yama and niyama, they aren't just moral platitudes or nice ideas. They are treated as absolute vital physiological prerequisites. They act as your baseline somatic and psychic stabilizers. And you need those stabilizers to withstand the intense energetic amplification caused by the advanced pranayama and meditation techniques we're about to get into. To really understand how this technology scales, check out this 4-tiered taxonomy of their contemplative offerings. It starts low complexity, basic mindfulness for the general public, and scales all the way up to Vishesha Yoga. That is a massively complex tier reserved strictly for advanced monastics, and it focuses directly on intracranial Vindu concentration and the pituitary pineal axis. For our purposes today, we're going to focus heavily on the mechanics of Sahaja Yoga, which is kind of the core sequence, and then we'll touch upon that advanced Vishesha level. Moving to Section 2, Biopsychology of the Chakras, the hardware integration. Because before we can even look at the software of the actual meditation lessons, we have to understand how Ananda Marga maps our internal biology. We are completely bypassing mystical abstraction here. Notice how cognitive layers and emotional propensities in this system are mapped directly to the physical body's central nervous system and endocrine glands via the chakras. So chakra isn't just some vague energetic metaphor. It's a literal control node. The Muladhara at the base affects the colon. Swadhisthana hits the sexual organs. The Manipur chakra at the navel directly regulates your pancreas and digestive system. Anahata governs the respiratory system. Vishuddha at the throat controls the thyroid and metabolism. And Ajna, the third eye, controls the pineal gland. By performing highly targeted concentration at these specific nodes, the practitioner is actively modulating the secretion of hormones, which then directly influences cognitive states and emotional behaviors. It is a precise mechanical feedback loop. Which brings us to Section 3, the Sahaja Yoga system. This is the core operating system. How do you actually manipulate this neuroendocrine network? That's Sahaja Yoga, which translates to simple yoga, though honestly, the mechanics are anything but simple. We're looking at a progressive system of 6 highly technical meditation lessons. Let's break down Lesson 1. It all starts with sheer physical mechanics. The practitioner establishes a stable, cross-legged sitting posture called Sadhana asana. The back has to be perfectly straight, eyes closed, but here is the crucial part. The tongue is folded back and placed on the roof of the mouth. In clinical terms, that specific tongue placement actively stabilizes the cranial nerves and calms autonomic flow. You are essentially prepping the physiological container for deep absorption before you even do anything with your mind. The execution of Lesson 1, which is called Ishvara Pranidhana, flows in a very strict sequence. First, after you secure the posture, you engage in pratyahara, systematically withdrawing your sensory focus from the physical layers. Second is mantra dipani. This transitions the mind from that everyday discursive chatter into a state of high receptive readiness. You are literally priming your neural pathways. Then comes the core mechanic, mantra agat. An acoustic strike. The practitioner takes a personalized two-syllable formula, prescribed specifically to their unique psychophysical vibration, and strikes it silently at a localized energetic center. And this is synchronized perfectly with the inhalation and exhalation of the breath. Finally, you pair that with mantra kirtanya, where intense cognitive awareness expands that localized mind right into a cosmic state. Once that baseline is established, lessons 2 through 5 are designed to rapidly expand that somatic container. In techniques like Tattvadvarana and Chakra Shaldana, you systematically concentrate on each individual chakra to purify the connecting nerves, or nadis. The source material actually describes these chakras as knots that bind the flow of energy up the spine. So, by concentrating the mind at these specific nodes using those acoustic formulas, you loosen the knots. This balances the neural endocrine secretions and completely preps the central nervous system for incredibly high-frequency mental focus. You'll often see the organization use this symbol, the golden lotus and the moon, to map out this expansion. The lotus represents the unfolding of those somatic and psychic centers, reaching upward toward full expansion, which is the moon. It's a beautiful metaphor, for sure. But never forget that right beneath it lies a rigorous, clinical methodology. Section 4, pranayama and autonomic regulation, looking at those feedback loops. The real clinical power of this entire system becomes glaringly obvious in Lesson 4, which is pranayama. This involves profound regulation of the autonomic nervous system. And because pranayama so drastically increases the capacity of your nervous system, Ananda Marga enforces strict physiological purity. You literally cannot safely practice this without adhering to a strict lacto-vegetarian diet. You have to ensure the chemical purity of your blood and maintain those ethical baseline stabilizers we talked about earlier. Now, why such strict prerequisites? Just consider this number for a second. 2.2. A healthy, normal human breathes somewhere between 16 to 18 times per minute. But clinical observations of experienced Ananda Marga practitioners, monitored at Stanford University and the University of Connecticut, showed their average respiratory rate absolutely plummeted to just 2.2 cycles per minute during meditation. The sources actually explain the mechanics of this perfectly. Think of the mind like a still lake, reflecting a thought. The breath is like a stone striking the water. Every single time you breathe, the ripple breaks your psychic reflection. So if you're breathing 18 times a minute, your focus is effectively shattered every 3 seconds. But by utilizing the pause in respiration, known as kompaka, and dropping that breath rate to 2.2 cycles per minute, the flow of concentration goes unbroken for over 30 seconds at a time. That allows for an unparalleled density of cognitive absorption. Section 5, Advanced Tantric Contemplation Methods. This is the developer root access level. What happens when you push this technology to its absolute limit? Well, beyond Sahaja Yoga lies a tier of advanced tantric methods taught almost exclusively to highly advanced practitioners and monastic renunciates. This is direct access to the deepest, most foundational layers of the human psyche. First up is Kapalika Sadhana. Historically, this is linked to skull-bearing ascetics, and it is a highly rigorous, intensely confrontational meditation practice. It doesn't bypass your trauma, it confronts it head-on. It's engineered to systematically dismantle the mind's deepest, most primitive psychological blockages and fears, including the literal fear of death itself. We're talking about a radical psychological dismantling that recalibrates the practitioner's entire threat response mechanism. And then, there is Vishesha Yoga Sut Yoga. This is the most complex contemplative tier in their entire taxonomy. It moves completely beyond the lower somatic chakras and focuses almost entirely on intracranial Vendu concentration. It directly targets your highest neurobiological centers, specifically the pituitary pineal axis, to bypass standard physiological limits and trigger rapid, massive neuropsychic shifts. So what is the ultimate output of all this biological manipulation, breath control, and acoustic striking? It's samadhi. The sources make this incredibly clear. Samadhi is not a practice that you do. It is the terminal, clinical, and spiritual result of the entire psychophysical operating system functioning perfectly. It's complete non-dual absorption, achieved in the culminating phase of anudhyana, where your localized I feeling just merges entirely with limitless consciousness. Which leaves us with a pretty massive question to consider. We so often look at meditation as just a simple tool for stress relief, right? A way to unwind. But if a highly structured contemplative technology can clinically drop human respiration to 2.2 cycles per minute, modulate endocrine secretions on command, and systematically dismantle our most primitive psychological fears, how much of our own neurobiological hardware is currently just sitting there, completely untapped. Think about that.